Chapter 3, Part 3, Imperial Tolerance and the Patience of History. Babylon did not collapse in a single night. Its streets remained broad, its walls still towered, and rituals in the temples continued as usual. Yet something had quietly changed. People spoke more of past glory than of future expansion. Officials concerned themselves with maintaining order rather than creating it. The most dangerous signal for an empire is never the approach of foreign enemies, but the moment it begins to believe that everything will go on as before. It was in such a moment that the image of the whore of Babylon was written. She was not a specific person, but a condition, the seduction of the human heart when power and wealth are joined together. What she represented was not indulgence, but rationalized corruption. When injustice begins to seem necessary, when violence is called order, when plunder is packaged as civilization. People no longer question whether the empire is just. They care only whether they can secure their own share within it. It was in this atmosphere that Jerusalem fell. There was no epic duel, no final battle to decide the world. The city was besieged, food ran out, and resistance lost its meaning in the face of hunger. On the day the temple was burned, smoke rose, yet no miracle occurred. God did not appear in the fire, nor did thunder drive back the enemy army. For the first time, people were forced to confront a cruel fact. Faith does not guarantee victory. Those who were taken captive were brought to Babylon. They were alive, yet they had lost direction. The lament by the rivers was not because of bodily suffering, but because identity had disintegrated. For the first time, they became a people without land. For the first time, they had to answer, "Who are we?" within a foreign language, system, and set of values. Then the empire changed hands. The Persians did not appear as destroyers. They took over cities and taxation, but not souls. The name of Cyrus was recorded not because he believed in the God of Israel, but because he allowed the captives to return. For the first time, an empire displayed an unprecedented tolerance. You may return to your city, rebuild your temple, continue your faith, so long as you acknowledge the order. For the exiles, this was almost like a resurrection. In the year the decree was issued, they sorted the sacred vessels, verified genealogies, and set out on the road home. They believed history could be rejoined at the point of rupture, that glory could be rebuilt upon ruins. Zerubbabel was invested with great hope, a descendant of David, carrying bloodline and symbolic meaning, as though the shadow of the former kingdom had appeared once more. But reality was colder than hope. The temple was rebuilt, yet it was no longer magnificent. On the day its foundation was laid, the young rejoiced, but the old wept. They remembered former splendor, the height of the stone pillars, the gleam of gold ornamentation. The new sanctuary fulfilled its function, yet could not carry memory. In that moment, people realized for the first time, some losses cannot be repaired simply by rebuilding. The city remained, but the kingdom did not. Jerusalem's walls were broken, its population sparse. It was a holy city, yet resembled a forgotten frontier town. The people had returned, only to find life harder than in exile. The land was barren, security fragile, enemies encircled them. Hope had not disappeared, but it had begun to grow cautious. It was in such a time that Nehemiah entered the scene. He did not live among ruins, but at the core of Persian power. He was cupbearer, standing beside the king, witnessing the precision and efficiency of imperial administration. For that very reason, when he heard news of Jerusalem, his reaction seemed all the more abrupt. He wept, fasted, and prayed. Not because he had lost personal interest, but because a city had lost its protection and a people had lost their dignity. His return was not a revolution, but a request. He relied on imperial permission, not the strength of rebellion. This itself was a portrait of the age. Restoration no longer came from miracles, but from effort within the cracks of institutions. The wall was completed in 52 days. The people worked with one hand and held weapons in the other. There was no celebration, no hymn, only vigilance. Security became the first need. Faith began to bind itself to defense. Purity was treated as boundary. The prohibition of intermarriage, the strengthening of the law, the clarification of identity, these measures were not born of malice, but of fear. Here history made a subtle turn. Return did not make people open, it made them cautious. Those who have experienced loss fear losing again. Thus faith, once a calling, slowly became a wall. Meanwhile, the Persian Empire was also quietly changing. It had once grown strong through tolerance, yet this vast inclusiveness gradually hollowed out its center. Its territory was too expansive, administrative costs too high, the aristocracy beginning to decay. The empire still existed, yet increasingly relied on inertia rather than creativity. Local problems were postponed. Peripheral crises were treated as temporary noise. History is never impatient, but it never forgets. While the Persians were still maintaining order, a new force was already forming in the north. The mountains of Macedon were unremarkable, yet they nurtured a different ambition. They were not content to manage the world. They longed to shape it. This chapter ends without war. There is only a quiet premonition. The old empire is aging, and a new civilization is approaching. Jerusalem stands in between, no longer the center of the world, yet unable to disappear entirely. It is preserved not because it is powerful, but because for the moment it still has value. The philosophy lies hidden here. History does not halt its cycles because of human repentance. It changes form only because of new conditions. Imperial tolerance is a strategy, not eternal goodness. National purity is a defense, not an ultimate answer. At the end of this chapter, the world appears stable, but the true upheaval is already on its way. Next time, it will no longer be merely the replacement of one empire by another, but a direct collision between civilization and civilization. Chapter 3, Part 4. On the day the world changed hands, it did not rain in Jerusalem. The stone roads in the city were still dry, and the white walls of the temple seemed almost too quiet in the sunlight. Only later did people realize that the truly dangerous moments in history are often not accompanied by thunder and flames, but arrive like this, when everything appears to be fine. When the Macedonians arrived, they did not rush first to the temple, nor did they force the people to kneel. Their banners moved in the distance, like a wind that had just changed direction. The city gates opened as usual, the markets remained noisy, and even the guards showed no obvious replacement. But the air was already different. These new rulers were in no hurry to command. They preferred to display. They displayed their language, their bodies, their order. They built gymnasiums where young men for the first time exposed their bodies in public, running, wrestling, cheering. They brought drama, placing heroes and gods upon the stage, turning fate into something that could be appreciated. They did not say, "You must." They said, "You may." This kind of temptation was sharper than swords. The young changed first. They learned to speak about the world in another language, to understand honor in another way. They began to feel that their father's reverence for the law was overly tense, as if they had always lived in fear. They were not eager to oppose anything. They simply, gradually and unconsciously, lowered the place of certain things. The Sabbath was no longer an absolute boundary. Circumcision became something private and awkward. The temple still stood, but it was no longer the center of life. The change had no name and no ceremony. It simply happened. By the time the Seleucid dynasty truly took control of the land, this change had already become irreversible. Antiochus IV did not understand Jewish hesitation. In his view, the world was moving toward unity, and to reject unity was itself an offense. He did not wish to persuade anyone. He simply wanted to end the dispute. Edicts began to appear, not once but one after another. The law was declared illegal, tradition labeled stubborn, and the temple redefined as a public space. When a pig was brought onto the altar and its blood flowed through the cracks of the stone, Many lowered their heads. It was not because they no longer believed in God. It was because they had begun to fear that believing in God would cost them everything. As long as we still believe in our hearts, isn't that enough? Some comforted themselves. If God is real, he will understand, others said. And so most people chose silence. The turning of history is rarely driven by the majority. In Modian, an unremarkable town, the priest Mattathias was called forward by name. When the king's envoy read the decree, his tone was not cruel. It even carried a matter-of-fact patience. If this old priest would simply take the lead in offering sacrifice, the matter would be over. No one else would have to be implicated. Mattathias stood there and time seemed to stretch. He saw the eyes in the crowd, eyes filled with pleading, with fear, and with a faint expectation. He knew that if he stepped forward, everyone would breathe in relief, but he did not. It was not anger, nor a gesture of bravery. It was more like an unexplainable pause. The moment a person realizes that if he retreats one step further, he will never be able to return. When another Jew hurried forward to complete the sacrifice in his place, a flash of steel cut the air. Blood fell to the ground. The sound was not loud, yet it was clear enough to make it impossible to ignore. In that moment, the world was divided into before and after. Mattathias fled into the mountains with his sons. They were not planning a rebellion. They were simply refusing to continue participating in a life they could not accept. They thought they were merely hiding, yet more and more people began to follow them. Those people shared no unified slogan, only the same exhaustion, a refusal to keep explaining who they were. Mattathias died quickly. What he left behind was not an army, but a direction. His son Judah was called Maccabee, the hammer. The name was not poetic, but it was fitting. His methods were rough and direct, never seeking elegance. He did not speak in grand theories. He did only one thing. He broke commands. They moved through the hills, striking, withdrawing, appearing again. Their victories were not glorious, their defeats not complete. Yet with each clash, more people realized one thing. The empire was not untouchable. When they stepped back into Jerusalem, the city felt both strange and familiar. The temple still stood, but like a body that had been hollowed out. They did not celebrate at once, nor did they proclaim a new era. They simply began to clean, stone by stone, vessel by vessel, slowly restoring order. The lamp was lit. It was meant to burn for only one day. It burned for 8. Later, people would call this story a miracle, but the true miracle was not in the oil. It was in those who had chosen, long before, not to step back again. The victory of the Maccabees did not end all problems. Power reappeared. Temptation returned. History did not become pure because of one act of resistance. But one thing was permanently written. When the world demands that you completely change who you are, you may still choose to be the one who does not fit the times.